Hi and welcome to Viking Superpowers. In today's video I'm going to have a look at incredible testimony given by Matthew Brown, who is a former Department of Defense and State Department analyst and author of the Immaculate Constellation report, which was presented to the United States Congress this year. The report is concerning unacknowledged special access programs involved with crash retrieval and reverse engineering of non-human spacecraft. We'll listen right through this testimony and then we're going to have a bit of a chat about what he has to say about paleo contact and about the state of our science, which he says has been tightly controlled, suppressed and distorted. So let's play the clip and then we'll chat about it.
Somebody was flying these things that crashed. Somebody built these things that are being reverse engineered. Who's that somebody? And why don't they come forward? I mean, you may not have seen that in a document or a file or something somewhere, but you've thought about it. You're a smart guy. What are your thoughts on the big picture questions? Who are they? Why are they here? Why don't they show us what's going on?
I think I have a good degree of confidence that the reason they're here is us. I think life, especially sentient life, is a precious thing. And I think to some, it might be a resource. I think humanity to some level is a resource for them.
Like a commodity?
Possibly a commodity, possibly a form of entertainment, possibly medical related.
Think they live here?
Yes.
For all intents and purposes?
Yes.
Always?
I don't know about always, but it certainly appears that they have been here for most of recorded history. At least some element of this has been here for most of human recorded history. I think they're both just as powerful as we think, but also less. And I think there is not a single they here. Certainly multiple factions of the same species, if not multiple species. And all the complexity that brings, which might be our best hope. So I have been exposed to no direct information on the anatomy, biology, intentions, culture, politics.
Never came across those files?
Never came across those. I think those are all some of the deepest secrets.
Right. They would be if this is correct information.
Mm-hmm. What I have learned is that we live in a dream, a carefully constructed reality. We make use of a science that is tightly controlled and suppressed and distorted. I think we are left behind.
Humans.
I think normies, the normal humans, the people have been left behind. Us. Mm-hmm. People need to understand that we might have freedom of speech, but that has been subverted. We do not have freedom of inquiry. We are blocked from learning what we need to know. Just in the public world, we are blocked from advancing in science. We are taught false science intentionally to prevent us from learning more. We live in the Matrix. It's just much more boring than the movie.
So that's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? There's a lot to unpack here, but I'll just go through from the start the things he said and just give some of my own ideas about that. He starts off saying George Knapp says somebody was flying these things that crashed, somebody built them. Now George has been investigating this for 50 years. He's very, very into this. He's very dedicated, and this is obviously what he wants to know, as with most of us. Who exactly are these beings? Who are they? Where do they come from? What's their purpose? What are they doing? So George says, you mightn't have seen a document or a file exactly, but you've been thinking about this and looking at all sorts of classified things, and you've come forward with all this information. What do you reckon? So Matthew, who obviously seems nervous, but he's putting himself in the firing line, actually, doing this. He seems to believe that his life's going to be in danger because of coming out with this, and most whistleblowers, unfortunately, have said that. So, whatever this is pretty big time. It's right up there at the top with the greatest mysteries of our world and our life. But Matthew says, I think life, especially sentient life, is a precious thing. That is, sentient is life that's aware of itself and aware of its surroundings in the way we are, rather than just existing and living within our environmental niche as most animals, plants and insects are. He says, I think to some we might be a resource, which I find disturbing. He then expands on that and says, possibly we're a commodity, possibly a form of entertainment, and possibly medical related. They're all disturbing. A commodity is something that's owned and sold. And one of my most ancient books, it's called The Book of Space Travel. It's from the early 50s, before they'd put up the first satellite. And it talks about the state of the art. It's by a scientist. It talks about the state of the art of space exploration, which is basically nothing. They hadn't been into space, but he's talking about the theoretical understanding that they had at that time. And it's a pretty straight book about, what will space travel be like. And then at the end, he starts talking about the flying saucers and about how, at that stage in 1953, all the sightings of great clusters of flying saucers and craft, and it's very cool because it's just coming from a person with a sort of an innocence, because it's such a new thing, talking about what was in the newspapers throughout the States and worldwide, and the great, saucer flaps that had happened then. I think he mentions Roswell, but he definitely talks about the saucer wave over San Francisco during the Second World War, where, anti-aircraft guns actually fired at these things and the searchlights were on them. And then over Washington, period of weeks, there was these craft constantly being seen in the sky, which is extraordinary. He finishes up saying Charles Fort, who wrote back in the early part of the 20th century and late 19th century about all sorts of strange stories, and stories that really are probably some of the very earliest newspaper type accounts of what we would call UFOs, or even alien interactions, even abductions. He finishes up saying, I think we're property, I think we're owned by the beings in this craft, and that's why they're here, is they're checking out their property. It's like a big farm. So that's what Matthew's saying here. He's saying, we could be a commodity, we could be a resource, which has a sinister undertone. What are they using us for food? Like that incredibly good but scary movie Under the Skin, set in Scotland with Scarlett Johansson. If you've seen that, see it. Unless if you're a bit freaked out by this subject in some ways, maybe you shouldn't watch it because it's a scary one. But we don't like to think about it, but there could be that aspect when, we see the cattle mutilations and all the blood drained out of cattle, but not a drop on the ground, and very, very strange things going on. We'd like to hope that's not happening to humans, but perhaps it is. So that's a sinister, sort of scary way to see it. Being a resource, we could even be, as I've talked about on my channel, how I believe I was approached by a girl who was one of these beings back in 1978, who wanted me to come on the mothership with her the next weekend, wanted to be my lover, wanted to take me out into space and show me amazing things, but I had to just leave everything behind. And I said no and walked away from it. It could be no connection at all, but around about that same time, 1978, Frederick Valentich was taken as he was flying from Victoria across to King Island in the Tasman Sea, between mainland of Australia and Tasmania. And there's other stories of this sort of thing, so perhaps part of the resource is they might sometimes take particular people who have, these beings see them as having particular gifts or potential, especially young people, and who knows what could be going on in that aspect of things. A form of entertainment spooked me a bit when he said that. I thought, that's sort of creepy. Like, are they just sitting back and watching us like watching TV? It's like a reality TV show. That's possible. This might be the set. This might be the Big Brother house, the whole planet. I've never really thought too much about that, but yeah, that is a strange possibility, isn't it? We could all be stars in the show, we just don't know about it. And the last thing is also freaky. It's like possibly medical related. So what does that mean? Maybe this captures all the stories that are told by very credible people about being inseminated, having babies, meeting their babies up in the craft, about star children. Who knows? I won't go too far into all that. That's a subject for another day. It is scary stuff to think about, but I always just think about the amount of experts and experiences who say there's nothing really to be terrified about. So let's leave it at that. He says, this is the most relevant to me in my Viking Superpowers project, do you think they've always lived here? Matthew Brown states unequivocally that he believes that these beings have been here for most of recorded history. And I've made videos about this, about other experts, high-level experts who've said, yes, the government and people in the know believe that this presence has been here since before recorded history, and possibly way, way, way before recorded history, maybe back to the last great high-tech civilization that we had before the Younger Dryas period. Maybe there's been many of those. I think a lot of us are waking up now to the so-called myths of the world, which seem to be turning out more and more to be actual stories of real things that happen, muddied by the fact of thousands of years of retelling and misunderstanding about what the story is actually about. And that, of course, is the whole point of my book, Viking Superpowers Way of Asgard. I'm looking at the Viking Age myths and stories much older than the Viking Age that, when retranslated clearly and when one thinks outside the box, seem to be talking about powerful beings who are mortal but not quite human, who have superpowers and who influenced us and our ancestors and taught and perhaps, bred with us, there's that medical aspect again, and gifted us with some of their genetics, and maybe even just what we are, the hairless ape with the bright brain, and strangely ill-adapted for this world of tooth and claw, not even fur to protect us in the winter or the baking sun of the tropics. We're a strange creature to live in this place. But yeah, I absolutely agree with him that they've been here for a long time. He talks about not just a single species, but maybe there's multiple factions of the same species, and I think that seems to be coming clearer, that there's many humanoid species, and the one I particularly feel connected to are the Nordics, who seem to exhibit classical Nordic features, the fair hair, tallness, slim physique, blue or green eyes, even very strange green eyes. He indicates that there could be multiple species. So if you follow this subject, you've probably been hearing about reports of insectoids, lizards. There's that sort of a belief that there's lizards running the show, that people in power are often lizards, families of lizards. I've never met a lizard. I've got nothing particularly against lizards. I quite like them, actually. But he's saying, this high-level Department of Defense analyst who sort of accidentally saw a whole lot of stuff he probably shouldn't, and went down that rabbit hole, he's saying there seems to be multiple species here. That covers our Viking superpowers, but let's look at superpowers. Let's look at the paranormal abilities that those of us who have experienced them in our lives know they're absolutely real, And yet at the same time, our society, our schools, our universities, our trusted commentators always tell us these things aren't real. There's no such thing as telepathy, clairvoyance, telekinesis, remote viewing, flying, levitating, magic, sorcery, shamanism. All these things are considered either charlatanry or for the simple-minded. And that, when I heard Matthew speak, it gave me a great charge, because he says quite clearly what I've always suspected. He said that what I have learnt is that we live in a dream, a carefully constructed reality, and we make use of a science that is tightly controlled and suppressed and distorted. I think we are left behind. Humans, I think normies, the normal humans, have been left behind. We are blocked from learning what we need to know. The public is blocked from advancing in science. So this is a very strong statement, especially coming from a person who's worked in government at a high level, and he's saying our science, and this could well be talking about our science for hundreds and hundreds of years, has been tightly controlled, suppressed, and distorted to spin the narrative that these beings want, which is essentially to keep us in our place, to stop us from becoming too powerful, from even discovering who we really are. And my friend Paul Wallace talks at length about this brilliantly in his books in the Eden series. If you haven't seen his books, you must get them. Paul talks about this purposeful attenuation of human abilities. He talks about these Elohim, as he translates from the Old Testament, the Hebrew word meaning the powerful ones. But he's talking about beings that are sort of overseeing the human race, and he talks about there being different groups of these Elohim in different areas, and they treat their humans differently in different places. Now, what I've found in my work is that there's a crossover between the Bible, the Mesopotamian stories, and these great northern stories. And I'm not just onto this as I can sort of think, well, I'll get in on the act with the very popular looking at the Bible and the Middle East and the Anunnaki and this sort of stuff. That's what I've actually found in the Viking stories and the sagas and the Eddas, the so-called myths. They talk about these Aesir, who they sometimes call the gods, but in that they mean those who are really powerful and who we invoke. They sometimes call them the Regin, R-E-G-I-N, which means the powerful ones, which is essentially the same word as Elohim. It says they originated in the Middle East, in Anatolia, in Turkey. They were connected to the Sumerians, and I think they were connected to the Babylonians. And if you know the Bible story of Babel, the Tower of Babel, the humans decided they want to get up and meet the gods. They wanted to meet the Elohim up in space. When they say built to heaven, they're really saying up to the sky, above the clouds, wherever that is out there where the stars are. So that story says that the Elohim saw what they're up to and said, uh-oh, we can't let them get too smart, otherwise they want to be like us. They'll start to get too uppity. They need to be put in their place. So they didn't. It doesn't say they smashed the tower, it just says they scattered their languages. So they had one language. They scattered them to many languages so they couldn't communicate easily with each other anymore. And that's the end of the story. But what I've found in the sagas is that the story of these Aesir, these Aus and Ausinir, which you could translate as gods and goddesses, just powerful beings that are humanoid, but there's an aspect to them where they feel like they're more on our side than some of these other Elohim around the place. And what happens is that they build Asgard north of where Babel was. They build it up in Anatolia, a couple of 100 kilometers from Babylon. But incredibly, they've got 12 languages in Asgard, and Asgard sounds like it's sort of circular, and it connects up to the sky, and there's an Asgard up in above the clouds, up in space. And there's a whole complex of halls and what sound to me like great craft, and then they connect way out, maybe through stargates or their spaceports, but they seem to connect way out into our solar system and perhaps in between solar systems. They seem to be more on our side, like I said, and because they had 12 languages, I feel like they were the people that were chased out. They left with that knowledge. They kept passing it on to their children. Perhaps they kept developing it, just avoiding the good old Yahweh and his mates. And eventually they redid it, but they set it up so that it wasn't smashed down. And this was called Yggdrasil, the great world tree that reached up above the clouds and spread out its limbs over the earth. And also a bridge called Bifrost, which means the Bifrost. It was a bridge with 3 colours, a shimmering, trembling bridge, and the gods went up sort of basically to the top of Yggdrasil, this great tree, and had their meetings every day. And they also met these other powerful ones. So all that I've found totally connects with what Matt Brown said. And so this science that is talked about in the sagas is a science not only of obviously high physical technology, but also a paranormal technology, which I've talked about in my last video about Íþróttir, the great powers, superpowers, high powers that are not just amazing creative and physical, like martial powers, not just poetry, not just painting and art and carving and all sorts of things, but paranormal abilities to see, to strike at a distance, to put fear into your enemies, to put great courage and invincibility into your own people, to lie down, go into a trance and travel vast distances and see what's happening over there. And this was right up to the Viking Age and even into the Christian age. The stories tell us that these things were still going on. So when I read this, when I hear this about this suppressed science, immediately I think, yes, that's what's been done in the time of Snorri Sturluson and before in the Viking Age. People fully believed these things were real and they were possible. But as we know, we've grown up in a milieu that says, no, impossible. These things are not possible. This is just fantasy. Okay in movies, okay in fairy tales. Kiddies can believe it. If you're an adult and you believe this stuff, you're a little bit soft in the head, you haven't grown up. But how about if we've been lied to? How about if we're now waking up that we've been lied to? And how about now we start pushing in and finding what is really possible? So I'm going to be doing the second part of that video I made about Íþróttir, about what was said about Odin when he came to the north with the skills that he invented and that he taught to his chief acolytes, human priests. Maybe priest is not the greatest word, it sort of works, but it's, just the people close to him, his apprentices, you might say, and the ones that taught the people of the north all these things, and they preserved them for thousands of years. We'll sort of look much further into that, and this is going to be an ongoing thing. I've got a lot to say about this subject. So I hope you'll continue to join me. I just want to thank not only Matthew Brown for being an incredibly brave human and coming out and telling us these things and putting his life in danger to tell us about this, but I really want to thank the legendary George Knapp for this interview, for doing so much for us over so many years, revealing, doggedly chasing down things, talking to right people, continuing on. It must be 50 years he's been doing it. And to Jeremy Corbell, who's just such a dogged researcher and has been helping bring all these whistleblowers forward. Thank you very much, guys. And I'll leave you to think about all this, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.